I go back and say, you know, I'm 10 years older than Steve, and I got Steve actually into the drumming business. When he was about 8 years old and I was 18, I went to a birthday party, and it was his, and I did a ventriloquist act. And it was this time, October the 4th, and it was snowing, and it got so bad that I had to stay overnight at his place, and we sat down at the dinner. And there was a good 6 or 7 people there, or 8 or 9, and I noticed that they had to set up a plate for me. I saw a spoon there and a knife. They were short silverware. And I saw that they were having pork chops, and I thought, that's all right. And right across from me was Steve. And when it came time to eat, you know, so much rustling around to get those pork chops. I mean, it was embarrassing. But the 3 I had were delicious. But I sit there, and I'm watching Steve, and he has his forks, and he's playing tunes, and I noticed that he was pretty good. As a matter of fact, it was embarrassing to me. I almost dropped a handful of mashed potatoes. But anyhow, I encouraged him to continue. I said, why don't you, if you like drumming, I said, look, he was, first of all, he was dressed all in black. He was wearing a hat. And being 8 years old, he still had the beginning of a beard. I noticed that. I'm not kidding now. And he was rather good with the forks. And I encouraged him to go into the music business. And lo and behold, 70 years later, I meet him at the Bullfrog. And he remembered me, because it's not often you meet a ventriloquist, but he remembered me. And to this day, he probably forgot my name, you know. But that's my relationship with Steve Mitchell. And you could believe it or not. I would probably not to believe it. But I would have fun with him with ventriloquism. He'd get a kick out of it. Hey, what are you doing there, Green? Hey, Steve. Hey, how are you? I used to do that type of thing years back. And he and I at the Bullfrog would have fun and laugh all the time. I encouraged him when he went into this sickness that think positive, and we talked on the phone 2 or 3 times a week. And of course, it was a big shock when it turned out the way it did. But Steve Mitchell, a Grammy Award winner, will always be in the finest memories for me.
I'm Flora Eyster. I'm a flutist of many years. I come from the free jazz and the improv loft scene of New York City. And when I met Steve in Manor Care Nursing Home in the early 1990s, he was recovering from an experiment of living alone on the Troy, Pennsylvania mountain, where he had encountered dire disaster. He was flat, down, barely awake. But he, with a patient Fan Mitchell at his side, my longtime friend, did recover. Steve and I went on to be music colleagues and played together many hours with Andy Seal first in a trio called the Steve Mitchell Trio. It was all free improv and jazz. Later, Steve and I spent over 1.5 years and recorded 4 very spatial albums released under Travel in Place music series by Milky Way Music. The albums were called Safari World Journeys, Rivers of Natchez, Goddess Tree, and Spirit Joyeux. They were released online. Some years later, we returned to the studio recording original jazz compositions that I tried for the first time. Andy Seal, Mary Kanish, Steve Mitchell, and I plunged again into a studio session that was very, very fruitful, and I was very pleased because I hadn't written music before or composed. Steve and I worked well together, all these years under two basic principles that we shared in music. There are no wrong notes, and music comes from silence. Steve was a Quaker, a friend, a teacher, an advocate, a mentor, a colleague, a beat keeper, a poet, an inventor, an actor, a dreamer, a myth, a legend, a soul searcher, a wanderer, a risk-loving experimenter, explorer, and a keeper of an intermittent lifelong journal, a writer. Take 5, Steve. To the gods, please make sure to deliver the New York Times to Steve's new address, stickquack@heaven.celestial. Thank you.
I first met Steve through one of my childhood friends, Tommy James. Steve had an ongoing gig right down the street here at Purcell's, and he was playing with Andy Seal and Greg Burgess. And I was about 16 years old when I first met Steve, and I would go every week, every Wednesday. That was what I looked forward to. From 6 to 9, I would go listen to the trio play. And I was just starting to get into jazz, and they played a lot of songs that caught my ear. A lot of really popular songs like Take 5 and Take the A Train, just great American popular songs and jazz standards. So every week I went and looked forward to hearing those guys and just listening and learning more about the music. And through Tommy, I got to meet those guys and become close with them. And you know, one of my fondest memories is after about a year of going every Wednesday, Greg Burgess approached me and said, you know, I talked with Steve and Andy, and if you would like, you can sit in next week with the band for the last set. And I was so scared, and in my head I was like, just tell them no, you can't make it. But I humbly accepted, and you know, my love for the music grew so much from that point on because these gentlemen were so welcoming, especially Steve. I remember Steve would always tell me, you know, when Greg's soloing, you gotta play like Freddie Green. Don't play these crazy chord voicings. Just keep it simple and just play good time. And he was always so generous with his mentorship, even for me as a guitarist. He just had so much to offer, and I'm so thankful for all that he did for me. And when I told him that I was moving to Pittsburgh to go to Duquesne University, he was so excited because that's where he graduated from college in 1967. So through my studies and gigs in Pittsburgh, I've met a lot of musicians who have played with Steve and crossed paths with him, and they always said just outrageously hilarious things about just the way that he was, like playing with the symphony, he was wearing sandals with a tuxedo, and then him playing with guys like Gene Ludwig and playing with really, really world-class musicians. So I'm very thankful for all the mentorship that he gave me. And one thing that I will always remember about Steve is, you know, he always told me that music deserves to be cherished and respected with all of your being, because it was his entire life from when he started playing drums up until he passed. So that's something I always keep with me, that playing music professionally, it's not a game. It's very real, and it's a lifestyle. So I'm forever in debt to Steve for all of the mentorship and all of the things he told me that were good and bad, what I needed to work on, and you know, taking things seriously. So I'm forever thankful for knowing him and being around him.